So we're diving into group therapy for addiction recovery. And honestly, I'm kind of curious about something. Like, it seems kind of counterintuitive, right? You're going through something as tough as addiction, and then you open up in a group setting. It seems like it'd be easier to just, clam up.
Yeah, I get that. But you've hit on a really important point. That vulnerability, that willingness to connect, well, that can actually be a huge part of what makes group therapy so effective.
So it's not just about like, oh, group therapy is good for everyone. There's something more specific going on.
Absolutely. Addiction often thrives in isolation, right?
Mm.
But recovery often finds its strength in those connections, those shared experiences, that sense of community. And group therapy really taps into that.
Okay, so that's the why behind the group setting. But one thing I found surprising from the research is that there's not just one type of group therapy, right?
Exactly. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. It's like addiction doesn't just affect people on one level, does it? It's physical, emotional, mental. It's this whole complex thing.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. You've got psychoeducational groups, which are really helpful for those who are kind of early in recovery, maybe still struggling with denial a bit. Like, imagine being handed a textbook about addiction. It'd be overwhelming, right? But in a psychoeducational group setting, you're learning alongside others. You're processing the science behind addiction, how it rewires the brain, and starting to make sense of your own relationship with substances in a whole new way.
So it's like laying the groundwork, kind of building that foundation of knowledge, but with other people who get it.
Right. And for someone who's maybe a little further along in recovery, someone struggling with those relapse triggers, or just trying to navigate life without substances, a skills development group could be really beneficial.
What kind of skills are we talking about here?
Well, think about what addiction often takes away, right? Healthy communication, setting boundaries, coping with stress without reaching for substances. Those are all skills, and a skills development group provides this safe space to learn and practice those skills, all with the guidance of a therapist and the support of your peers.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That reminds me of something I found super interesting in research, this connection between PTSD and trust. You see, people with PTSD often struggle with trusting others, and group therapy can actually help rebuild that trust. So what's the connection to addiction recovery?
Ah, I see where you're going with this. And it's a brilliant observation because it gets to the core of why group therapy can be so powerful for addiction recovery. See, addiction thrives in shame and secrecy. People isolate themselves thinking they're totally alone in this struggle. But group therapy throws those doors wide open. It breaks down that isolation and allows for genuine connection, which is huge.
So it's more than just like venting or swapping stories. It's about rebuilding that fundamental trust in yourself and in other people.
Exactly. And that's actually where those communication skills we were talking about become super important.
Hmm.
Because in group therapy, you're not just processing your experiences, you're actively practicing healthier ways to communicate, to set boundaries, to build relationships. And those are all essential skills for a lasting recovery.
It's like you're kind of rewiring your social circuits, after spending so much time in isolation. But one thing that really jumped out at me from the research was this whole idea of feedback. And not just receiving it, but giving it too. Like, how does helping other people in the group actually boost your own recovery? It seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I think it speaks to how addiction messes with your sense of self-worth.
Oh, totally. Like you get stuck in that cycle of, I'm a failure, I'll never get this right, that kind of thing.
Exactly, and that kind of thinking can be, well, let's just say it's not exactly helpful for staying on track with recovery.
Right. It's like a one-way ticket back to using.
Exactly. But in group, something kind of amazing happens. When you offer feedback to someone else, you're not just giving advice, you're drawing on your own experiences. You're tapping into what you've learned in your own recovery, and suddenly you're not just the addict in the room anymore. You're the person with wisdom, with insights that can actually help someone else.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like, even if you're still figuring things out for yourself, you can still step into that mentor role for someone else in the group.
Yeah, and that shift in perspective, it can be really powerful. It reinforces this idea that recovery is possible, that you're capable of growth, that you do have something valuable to offer, even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes.
So giving feedback is like this unexpected boost of self-worth, huh?
Absolutely. And then on the flip side, receiving feedback when it's done right, of course, can be incredibly healing Because in a healthy group therapy setting, feedback isn't about judgment or criticism.
Right, it's not supposed to be a rose battle or anything.
Exactly. It's about offering support, different perspectives, maybe some gentle guidance. The research actually gave a really good example of this. Imagine someone in the group is struggling with saying no to going out to bars with friends, even though they know it's a trigger for them.
Yeah, I can see how that would be tough.
Yeah. Right. So supportive feedback in that situation might sound something like, hey, I totally get that. I used to really struggle with that too. What helped me was finding new things to do with my friends that didn't involve alcohol. It's about sharing what's worked, letting each other know we're not alone in these challenges.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, I do think it's important to clarify something here. Group therapy isn't the same as going to a support group, right? Like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. And it's not meant to replace individual therapy either. So how do all of these different approaches kind of fit together?
That is a great question because it can definitely get confusing trying to figure out what's right for you. It's helpful to think of it kind of like levels of support.
Oh, okay. I like that.
So you've got support groups like AA or NA, which are amazing for a community, for connecting with others who truly get it, who've walked in your shoes.
Yeah, it's that feeling of, I'm not alone in this, which can be huge, especially early on.
Absolutely. And then you've got individual therapy, which is that space for really deep personal work. It's where you can delve into your own unique history, your triggers, traumas, any underlying issues that might be fueling the addiction.
It's that one-on-one attention that can be so valuable.
Exactly. So where does group therapy fit in? Well, it actually kind of bridges the gap between the two. It's where you take what you're learning in individual therapy, those insights, those coping skills, and you start to practice them in a safe, controlled environment.
So it's like taking those individual therapy lessons out for a spin in the real world, but with like a safety net.
Precisely. You get to test out new coping mechanisms, practice setting boundaries, and you're getting feedback from multiple perspectives, including people who truly understand because they've been there themselves. The research actually highlighted a really cool example of this. There was this one woman who was working in individual therapy on setting boundaries with her mother, who was also in recovery. And she was, understandably, terrified to actually put it into practice.
Oh, wow. I can only imagine.
Right. But in the group setting, she felt supported enough to actually have that difficult conversation with her mom, but she role-played it first with other group members.
Wow, so she got to practice those tough conversations and get feedback from people who understood the dynamics of addiction and family relationships. That's incredible. It really highlights how group therapy isn't just one thing. It's this multifaceted tool, and it can be adapted to different stages of recovery and, like you said, different needs.
Right. And I think what's so cool is that it really speaks to the fact that addiction is complex, right? There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about finding that right combination of support for each person.
Yeah, it's like putting together a puzzle.
Yeah.
You got to find the pieces that fit your journey.
Such a good analogy. And just like with a puzzle, sometimes you need a little help seeing the bigger picture, right? And that's why I think it's so important for anyone who's thinking about group therapy to really approach it with intention.
So it's not just like, oh, I've heard group therapy is good, and then just show up, right?
Exactly. It's about taking some time to think about what you're actually hoping to get out of it.
Okay, so what kind of questions should someone be asking themselves?
Well, for starters, are you mostly looking for connection, a sense of belonging? Or maybe you need to learn some essential communication skills, those tools for building healthy relationships. Or maybe it's about breaking down denial, really confronting your relationship with addiction head on. The answer to those questions that can really point you in the right direction, help you find the type of group that will be most helpful for you.
It's about finding the right tool for the job and then learning how to use it, right?
Exactly. And what we've seen from all this research is that group therapy, when it's done skillfully, with intention, it can be incredibly powerful. It can be a game changer.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I got to admit, I went into this kind of thinking of group therapy as this big, kind of intimidating thing, but now I really see the nuances.
It's amazing what a little digging can do, right?
Totally. And I think the biggest takeaway for me, and hopefully for our listeners, is that there's no shame in asking for help, no shame in needing support.
Couldn't agree more. Addiction thrives in isolation, but recovery is a team sport.
So true. To our listener, if you're struggling, please know you're not alone. And group therapy, with all its complexities and potential, well, it might just be that missing piece in your recovery journey.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep reaching out for support because you deserve it.